All right, we're back for another week of high school football. Shelby Star and Gaston Gazette sports editor Richard Walker, sports reporter Joe Hughes. Looks like we're in for a wet one, at least here this weekend has kind of moved up a lot of the schedule.
And as you and I both know, both of our cell phones have been blown up for about 2 or 3 days now with what's going to happen, what may happen, what could happen, and obviously we're down to, as we speak now, on Tuesday afternoon, we've only got one game that has not officially moved off of Friday, but we're kind of led to believe that Kings Mountain and Shelby, there's a possibility that would happen, unless the weather projections, of course, change, I believe. Their decision-making process, according to Lance Ware, Shelby Athletic Director, is 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. So by tomorrow, and we'll try to get it out online or Twitter or however you follow us, what the Shelby Kings Mountain game status will or won't be. But the rest of the games we do know, and nobody's playing on Friday. In fact, 3 are playing tomorrow night.
Right. Those 3 are Ashbrook, undefeated Ashbrook at Clover. Clover coming off a big win over South Point. Undefeated Highland Tech going to Huntersville to take on Christ the King, and Crest, which is coming off an emotional victory over Shelby. They have to strap it up and go to Weddington for another tough matchup.
Yeah. So
those 3 are tomorrow.
Three intriguing games tomorrow.
Certainly, and of course Thursday, the biggest game that's probably out of those is Stuart Kramer hosting South Point. And East Gaston, East Lincoln, Bessemer City at North Lincoln, East Burke at West Lincoln, undefeated West Lincoln, Burns at Hendersonville, and I think that's the whole lineup.
I think that's all of them, yeah.
But let's kind of pivot back to what kind of transpired in week 4. What really kind of took your eye?
It's interesting, and it was a game you were at. I felt like walking away from the Crest South Point game that Keaton Hale, I feared the worst, that he could be done for the year. Obviously, not a torn ligament, sat out a couple of weeks, comes back. Give South Point a little bit of a spark, but Clover had enough to win that game in the way that they couldn't quite finish the deal the week before with Hunter Huss. But it strikes me, and you were at the game, I know I was at the Huss game, you could probably throw Huss, South Point, and Clover all together, and the outcomes would be fairly even if they played 4 or 5 times apiece, and certainly we talked about it a lot, about Clover comes north and has great success. They're now 2-1 going into an unbeaten matchup with Ashbrook tomorrow, and we'll be interested to see what that does for them moving forward, because as you look at Region 3 5A, the door is wide open for anybody to kind of take charge of it.
Yes.
And Clover has the best overall record, which won't mean anything when you start playing those other 4 teams in that region, but it would certainly appear that Clover in the second year of Brian Lane is probably pretty close to where they'd like to be.
Certainly, as you that kind of saw, Clover's physicality. You expect a team that likes to air it out and just be finesse. No, Clover is actually pretty physical. David Hall brings a solid running game to that. I think he rushed for nearly 100 yards, if not over 100 yards on last Friday. And then that defense, shutting out South Point in the second half, they scored the last 16 points of that game and really took it over. And South Point really had no answer for what they were bringing in the second half. And if they can keep that up, they really do have a real chance against a down Region 4.
Or at least as it appears today. I mean, obviously a lot of things can change. High school football often is a week-to-week thing.
Right. And going into this week, I think we have 7 teams that are still undefeated. Ashbrook, Stuart Cramer, Hunter Huss, Highland Tech, Kings Mountain, West Lincoln, and Crest. Out of those, which one do you put most stock in?
Well, based on their past performances, you got to go with Kings Mountain right now. But this game is a big game for them. They've not won at Shelby since 1986. I've lived here all these years and was surprised by this. That's before I moved back here. And that's a big game. The Battle of Buffalo Creek, no joke. They felt they should have won last year. You went to the 7-on-7 competition. Kings Mountain lost that game. Obviously not high school football. But there is a bit of an albatross. Whatever mojo Shelby's got going against Kings Mountain right now. And that is a big game for them on whenever they play it, Thursday, Friday, or even next Monday, I think is a possibility for them to kind of get beyond that, because that's a big game in the history of that school. Kings Mountain started football in 1922. The first game they played with Shelby was in 1923. They generally played every year since then. It's a big thing for them. And they've had as good a team as I've ever seen over there with these guys. I mean, certainly the way you look at them, the 1998 team that got to the 3A championship game is probably the one that most people hold the standard to. I believe they won, I think it was 1955, and the way the playoffs were structured differently, they only played a Western championship game. They didn't even play the Central Division champion and the old Western North Carolina Activities Association, but that's a state championship. But those two teams are kind of what all others are measured against in Kings Mountain history, and this team has the potential and past to measure very favorably with those two teams. I believe in them more just because I've seen them do it the last couple of years and slowly but surely get to that point. But this is a really big week for them. But, and then the two teams that I'm intrigued by, and it's refreshing. Ashbrook, 4-8 last year. I felt like they made progress. It's interesting, having done their preview, I don't think they felt they made a lot of progress. But you're now seeing maybe the seeds that they sowed a year ago, and they're paying off some benefits. And then I'll tell you what, I got to admit, sometimes I'm wrong, because we talked about this with Highland Tech. I'm thinking, okay, just because you came from Harding doesn't mean anything for Highland Tech. David DeLeo, whatever he's doing, and whatever was left behind by previous coach Darren Shepard, who's also an assistant now at Shelby, you guys built a possibility for something to happen at Highland Tech. And again, we're in a business where we don't root for teams. I'm so happy for those kids because they have had such a rough go of it with football, because their program isn't really set up to be good in football, and they're in a real challenging 1A conference. Will this mean anything moving forward? I expect them to win tomorrow night.
Certainly.
That'll put them at 3-0. I mean, we're in rare air for the mighty Rams of Highland Tech, and good for them. I mean, they have, Lord knows, put in their time and faced their adversity and struggles to get to this point, and it feels good to see them go through some success.
Right. And the Ashbrook, 300-plus yards on the ground, and they didn't complete a pass last week.
Through one pass that could have been a touchdown.
Wow.
Forestview defended it well. A halfback pass by Tyrese Nicholas. Kind of faded on him. But we talked about it before. Brian Andrews said to me, and he said to you, hey, we're going to do what we know.
And not to leave Hunter Huss out of that, they're probably
yes.
coming off their most complete game of the season, right, where all three facets really had a role in that.
And after last year, giving that game away, in their opinion, they had Hickory down big, and then Hickory came back and beat them at Huss a year ago. So that was a big game for them. I know you're ready for conference play for Jamar McCoy, but maybe the bye week might come at a bad time, because I think they're playing well.
Right. I kind of look at certain games as kind of turnkey games, because that loss to Clover was kind of a turnkey game last year for them, and getting both of those wins, who knows what that might actually have in store for them.
Because they were 8-5 a year ago, and so close to 10-3 just on those two games alone. And that's not to mention their seeding would have been different in the playoffs had they been, I guess they'd have been 6-4. They wouldn't have been. They would have had a better record going in the playoffs, not a better seeding, and maybe don't finish 8-5. But that's how close they were a year ago, and they've turned those two games around.
And now it's time to look into Week 5, and what are you looking forward to?
Well, Ashbrook Clover is an interesting matchup. I personally picked Clover. Would not surprise me if Ashbrook wins. I think this game will fall in line with a lot of the other games we've seen recently, much like Ashbrook's game last week at Forestview. Can Ashbrook continue to rely so heavily on Tyrese Nicholas? Last week, Ja'Kai Greer had a little bit bigger game, but I think Forestview was loading up on the fullback dive, and the quarterback had some opportunities and took advantage of them. And that's kind of where it's the red bone offense from South Point. I'm not sure if they have a name for it quite yet at Ashbrook, but it's the Georgia Tech offense. A lot of the service academies running. I mean, it's heavy on discipline. It means if you're a lineman, you have your zones to block, and you try to seal plays off, and you try to get quick decisions from a quarterback to get the fullback the ball and try to get your runners in space. And Ashbrook's look good doing that. I think they're going to have a tougher time with Clover, because I do think that Ashbrook, as the year wears on, is going to need to find a way, maybe not to be a pass-happy team, but to find a way to have some effective passes. Back in the good old days, you'd always talk about Alabama with Bear Bryant. They might throw 4 passes a game, but 2 of them would pop for plays. First downs, touchdowns, big plays. I think that's what Ashbrook has to find to do. And again, they almost did that last week. That halfback play, Forestview covers it well, and the pass wasn't quite there. But the receiver was briefly open for Ashbrook on that play, and the Forestview defense, all but one player, bid on it. So, it only takes one player to kind of save that play, but I look for Ashbrook to figure out a way to try to get some offensive, just a tad more offensive balance. But they do what they do. And last week I was over 300 yards rushing.
Yeah.
And Forestview's defense, it gave them all they wanted.
And the question for Ashbrook's going to be, can they continue to keep that up? And the best thing for Clover is they saw something similar last week.
Yeah.
So, and they played it, as I said, they played it well in the second half.
Sure.
And if they can continue that type of momentum and at least put a little more pressure on Ashbrook to score just about every possession, because Clovers are averaging nearly 500 yards per game.
They're moving it up down the field.
The only team that has stopped Clover all year is Clover.
Yeah.
So if Clover
offered some resistance, but they still outgained them, as I recall.
Yeah, they had 546 yards in that game.
Yeah.
So if they continue to just rack up the yards, they scored 30 points and they actually at points struggled. So if that's an indication of what Clover has to offer, that has to be a good sign favoring Clover.
Yeah. I've got a story running in Thursday's paper. Side Point had scored 215 consecutive points against Stuart Cramer. They didn't win the game last year 41-14. Will this rivalry turn? I talked to Coach Ben McMillan. It's a rivalry whether he wants to talk about it or anyway, just because they're 3.1 miles apart. When Stuart Cramer was built, it was inherent that they would have rivalries with two schools and really a third, because all of the kids that they drew from were Side Point, East Gaston, and to a smaller degree Forestview. So those three games were locked in as rivalry games right off the bat for Stuart Cramer. Side Point's the school they're physically closest to. You have so much back and forth between the two towns and their fan bases. As this year for Stuart Cramer, I don't know. I mean, I picked Side Point. It would not completely shock me if Stuart Cramer could win this game, but it's one of those, they got to prove it. But I will say this in their defense, and so I'm writing a story. Look at the history of their program. They started in 2013, fielding a JV team. They started off, I think, 0-4 or 5, won 3 JV games late, showed some progress. First year of varsity competition, largely with freshmen, sophomores, and juniors. They win a game in their first year. So they didn't go winless. They won a game. Then in the year 3, they won 5 games. They were 1 win away from going to the postseason that year. Their last year as a 2A school in the then named Big South 2A, 3A. Then the first year, the next year they're 2A, they get in the playoffs, they lose a game. Win 7 games, win their first conference games. Then last year they win 8 games and win a playoff game and are eliminated by eventual state champion Charlotte Catholic. So each and every year you can point to discernible, tangible progress. This win would indicate progress to me, and we've talked about before, they're in as challenging a conference as they can possibly be in, and after they play Side Point, I believe they've got Kings Mountain and Crest back-to-back weeks. So this is a real challenging schedule for Stuart Cramer, but they have answered the bell so far. They're off to a 3-0 start. Things are looking up for them, but we'll find out. We'll know a whole lot more about Stuart Cramer here in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
In East Lincoln, Bessemer City, North Lincoln, East Burke at West Lincoln, Burns at Henderson.
What a story for West Lincoln.
Yeah, certainly. They're just racking up points in bunches as well. But the question is, what can they keep this up, especially with conference schedule coming and rolling in? So
West Lincoln is, on a rare roll. They've got, dating back to 1968, they've got 9 starts of 3-0 or better. They're going for 4-0 this week. Wow. So we shall see how they do. And it looks to be an opportunity in that league, because other than Maiden, does anybody really stand out? I mean, I know you and I were impressed with East Lincoln, ironically enough, against Stuart Cramer in a scrimmage, but the regular season has been kind of mixed results a little bit for the Mustangs. This week, potentially a big game for them. Probably, I would think they would have their way with East Gaston. And then the other game you talked about, one of the best games I saw a year ago was North Lincoln at Bessemer City. North Lincoln turned it over too many times. Bessemer City, I believe the score was 32-27, a really exciting game. Could have gone either way. Bessemer City is off to a slower start than they've been having. North Lincoln has a lot of high expectations with a new coach. I would think that'd be an exciting game.
All right. Well, whether you go out Wednesday, Thursday, or maybe even Friday or Monday, just be safe, have fun at the ball games, and we look forward to seeing you next week.